Okay, so we're now live. Alexia, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Alexia y aquí van a ver a mi compañera Jen y somos parte de una colectiva llamada Antena Los Ángeles. Y Jen está muted. There you go.
Hi, my name is Alexia, and over here you will see my compañera Jen, and together we work with a collective called Antena Los Ángeles.
Antena Los Ángeles es una colectiva que se dedica a fomentar la justicia del lenguaje en Los Ángeles y el sur de California.
Antena Los Ángeles is a collective dedicated to promoting language justice in Los Angeles and all around Southern California.
Y si se están preguntando qué es la justicia del lenguaje, ahorita les diremos.
And in case you're wondering what language justice is, we will tell you right now.
La justicia del lenguaje es el derecho básico que todos tenemos de comunicarnos, entender y ser entendidas en el idioma en el que nos sentimos más cómodos.
Language justice includes the basic right that each of us has to speak, to understand, and to be understood in the language in which we feel most comfortable.
El espacio en el que vamos a estar hoy van a coexistir tres diferentes formas de comunicación o idiomas que son el español, el inglés y ASL.
In the space that we'll be sharing today, three different forms of communication or languages will be coexisting. Those are English, Spanish, and ASL.
Otra parte de la justicia del lenguaje también es honrar los diferentes idiomas que a lo mejor no están presentes en el espacio, pero que están en nuestra tierra, y también otros idiomas que han sido invisibilizados o que siguen en resistencia.
Another aspect of language justice that's very important is to honor and recognize all of the languages that are present that may not be actively used in this space, and which also exist in the lands that we inhabit, which may have been invisibilized or otherwise lost through historical process.
Entonces, queremos honrar a la tierra y a los idiomas que están aquí presentes.
So we want to honor the land and also all of the languages that are present with us.
Otra parte de la justicia del lenguaje es que es una responsabilidad colectiva.
Another key element of language justice is that it's a shared responsibility.
Entonces, les pedimos a las personas que van a estar hablando que mantengan un paso moderado, y si nos ven haciendo esto, es que tienen que hablar más despacio. Queremos honrar a la tierra y a los idiomas que están aquí presentes.
So we are going to ask everyone to support language justice by speaking at a moderate pace. And if you see the interpreter making this gesture, if you could please slow down a bit.
Y si nos ven haciendo esto, significa que hablen un poco más alto para poder escuchar.
And if you see us making this gesture, that means we need you to speak just a little bit louder so that we can hear you.
Y nada más para que las personas sepan, si se están uniendo a la reunión de hoy y quieren escuchar en español, hay una línea que debería de estar posteada aquí en el caption de Facebook.
And for those of us who want to participate in this conversation in Spanish, you should see the Spanish language phone line in the closed caption area of the Facebook video.
Sabemos y reconocemos que los tiempos de ahorita están muy complicados por el clima político y todo lo que está pasando, entonces estamos muy contentos de poder estar aquí y apoyar el espacio y crear comunidad.
We know and are experiencing that the current moment that we're in is extremely difficult, both because of the political climate and everything that's happening. So we're especially pleased to be able to be here in community with all of you.
Creo que por el pronto eso es todo. Se lo pasamos a los facilitadores. Muchísimas gracias.
I think that's everything for the moment. So we'll pass the mic to the facilitators. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. We're really happy to have Spanish interpreters and ASL interpreters as well. It's really important for us to make this space as accessible as possible. So first off, welcome. This is the first of many community calls that TLC has created in order to break isolation, to spread political knowledge around some of the ways that trans folks, trans migrants, Black trans people in the South, and so on, are impacted by this health crisis, this global pandemic. And it's also a space for us to gather together at the end of the week and find ways to celebrate small victories, find ways to be with one another in space. So I also want to acknowledge that this is an experiment for us. So in technology, and also this is one of the first ways that we've tried to engage digitally. And so I hope that folks can have a bit of patience with us. I also forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Xoai. I'm the digital media coordinator. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. So this is my home. Welcome to my living room. I'm going to be moderating this first call. We have a couple of really great folks on today, including from the Transgender Law Center. Actually, a couple more seconds for folks to tune back in. Okay, so it looks like we're back on. Remember when we said be patient with us? This is one of those moments. So as I was saying, this is not just a physical health crisis, but also an emotional crisis. We have to find ways to tap into the resilience that our ancestors have built over decades and centuries within the trans community, right? This is a threat that is an additional threat. So many of us have been living in crisis for so long. And that's why the coronavirus represents an even greater impact for many of us who are in detention centers, who are living on the streets, who are engaging in sex work, and so on. So we really want this space to engage all of that tension. We want this space to not be a space where you have to feel like you're overcoming your fear, but to kind of move through that fear and also balance it with some of the circles of care that we have among one another. If anything, this time has showed us that we're only as strong as the connections among us, and that this time will be defined by how we show up for one another, how we show up for people who are most impacted by this crisis. And so we're really glad that you're with us digitally today. I'm going to first pass it on to, well, before I get to that, I want to note that folks, please feel free to add comments and questions if you have feedback, if you have suggestions in real time. My colleague Anna Castro from our communications team will be checking the comments along with another communication staff, Sue Yaka Bible. And so thank you to those folks. So now I'm going to pass it to Deesha to lead us in a grounding exercise.
Thank you, Xoai. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to start us off today actually just grounding right in practice. Before I say that, just Deesha, I'm a healing practitioner. And I'm drawing this practice from work I do with generative somatics and adapting it for this call. So let yourself, you can stand, you can sit, you can lay down. Really, anything that lets you feel comfortable right now is the right stance to be in. Anything that lets you feel kind of more of your body or feel more alive will support it. Start by feeling your breath and let yourself notice the length of the body. The long bones, the spine, really from the top of the head all the way down to the feet, not forgetting the tops of the shoulders all the way down to the tips of the fingers. And then even extending beyond, feeling for what is above the top of the head, the sky, the universe, the unknown, whatever you would call it up there. And feeling for what's beneath your feet, the earth, the land, the ground, plants, animals. And notice what it's like if any shifts are happening in your body, just starting to feel your connection to ground and sky. And if it feels right for you, you can even sort of extend your arms down, feeling more connection to the ground. You could also extend upwards, feeling more connection to that feeling of surrender. And then start to bring your attention to the width of your body, feeling for all of the space between the sides, and you can like move a little bit side to side if that feels right. Feeling for all the space between the ears, between the sides of the neck, between the shoulders, between the sides of the body, between the hips, across the width of the legs, across the knee, across the ankle, across the feet. And just noticing, like, what's it like to let yourself melt out, be in space. And now let yourself bring to mind, who is someone at your side, and place them on your right side. Be in space. And who is someone that you'd like to place on your left? And the who, remember, can be a person, it can be a pet, it can be a spirit. And let yourself feel the support of those at your side. And imagine who's at their side. And as if there's these cushions, long cushions of support at your side, see what it's like to relax into that. Noticing any new sensations, thoughts, or feelings that might be coming up here. As we then transition into depth, feeling for all the space between the front and back body. And if it's possible to do a little bit of rocking forward and back, and if you're laying down, you can feel for what's at your front and back. Right, in any sort of position, we can feel for front and back. And here we're going to actually lean more into the back. And feel for who's at your back, what's at your back. Right, we have loved ones, we have nature, we have spirit, ancestors. And what else, what brings you joy? What brings you comfort? It can be simple. The sunshine, grass, water. And just letting yourself feel the impact of this. And we're going to close here with a hand at the center. Just thanking ourselves for taking this moment. And I'm just going to come to a seat and just name a bit about, I want to, in this moment, really, really super normalize that people are feeling isolated and people are feeling anxious. And as someone who's a mental health practitioner, and I meet with many folks every week, it's everyone. It's really, there's no one that's not feeling something really hard right now. And I want to normalize that because I think there's so much stigma, right, around hard feelings, and especially in this moment, people are feeling very alone in feeling alone. And I want to dispel that myth that you're alone. And especially for those of us who have been isolated due to gender, race, class, or have felt stuck in our homes growing up, or have felt, really, like, the current situation is taking up a lot of trauma and making us feel anxious for a lot of really valid reasons. The last thing I want to say is that, what we know helps us cope may or may not be working right now. And I want to normalize that too. So for me, for example, the centering practice, the grounding practice I just shared, often in a sort of normal stress time, like I'm like, oh, I can count on that. It'll bring me down. These days, it's like I can maybe like 5% help myself with that, and I might still feel hard feelings. So let's be as compassionate with ourselves as we can, right? That this is a collective, what this calls for is, and I know others on the call are going to talk more to this, but collective social change. And it is not any individual's fault if you're having a hard time. So the thing for us to do is like this call, reaching out, connecting, and I'm going to share some resources too with folks to stay connected and to get support right now, because we all need it. I'm passing it on.
Thank you, Deesha. That exercise and your words were so valuable. I'm just noting for folks that on our live right now, it says there's 81 people watching. And so if you can imagine 81 people in a really large room with you virtually, maybe the largest gathering that you've been to in the past 3 weeks. I just really want folks to engage with the presence of others watching with one another right now, and how we really aren't alone, as Deesha has said. I'm also going to remind folks that there's a reason why the ESL interpreter is the largest icon on the screen, and that's so that folks who need ASL can actually see, and so that the call is accessible. So that's going to be how the screen will look for the remainder of the call, so that folks know. Next up, I'm going to pass it on to our Executive Director, Kris Hayashi.
Great, thanks, Xoai. It's really good to be here with everyone. I'm over here in Oakland, California right now. And I really want to start out by talking about this moment that we are in. So we know that the majority of our community was already facing violence and huge barriers to survival, right? Just this week, we learned of yet another murder of a Black trans woman, Monica Diamond in North Carolina. We know that as a movement, we were already facing escalated attacks by the current administration against our lives and our rights. And we know that in this moment of a global pandemic that highlights the failures of the systems and institutions of our society, failures that as trans, as non-binary, as gender non-conforming people that we are too familiar with, we know that our communities will be particularly impacted. And we also know that for trans communities with the least access to resources and facing the highest levels of violence and attacks, that it will be even more so in this moment. For people of color, sex workers, migrants, Black and brown trans women and femmes, people who are incarcerated, trans folks with disabilities and chronic illnesses, people living with HIV, elders, youth, low-income folks and homeless folks, rural and Native communities, and so many others. So while we are all impacted in this moment, centering the leadership, skills, and needs of those most impacted is more critical than ever before. And while this moment is different than what we've experienced before, I just have to raise up incentive for us that we know how to do this, right? Like we know how to take care of each other, how to keep each other alive, how to make sure that our folks have places to sleep, have food, have protection, and ways to live and thrive and be in community together. This is what we have always done for each other. Before any of us were on TV or before any of our organizations had received a grant, right? We looked out for each other, often when no one else was. And if there was any time to draw on this knowledge, skill, expertise, and the wisdom of our elders, it is now. It is inspiring and beautiful to witness how our communities all across the country are doing exactly that. In this moment, going above and beyond to do what it takes to keep each other alive. And what is different today, and that I've been grounding in and drawing strength from in this moment, is that the trans movement is stronger than it has ever been before. We have trans-led organizations all across the country, local, regional, national. We have trans-led service providers, trans-led shelters. We have trans funders, trans media makers and cultural workers. We have trans elected officials. So many people in service of our communities, particularly Black and Brown led. And we are networked and connected and in coalition more so than ever before. Of course, our movement needs so much more and we deserve so much more, but we are stronger than we have ever been to meet this hard moment of a lot of uncertainty. And I've been drawing a lot of power and strength in this moment from that knowledge. That said, this is a moment to use all of what we have fought so hard to build for our communities, to learn how to hold uncertainty and ground in our power, to lean into the relationships that we have worked so hard to build with each other, to find joy in the communities that we have created, and to hold on to our long-term vision of liberation and justice for our people, while we do what we need to keep ourselves alive today. So I want to be really clear, TLC is not going anywhere. We're listening closely and following the leadership of our National Trans Coalition, led by majority Black, Indigenous, and migrant trans leaders. We're listening closely to community, to trans leaders all across the country, to what are the needs. Trans people, we are not going anywhere, and we will all continue to do what it takes to keep trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people alive, thriving, and fighting for our liberation, even in this moment. With that, I'll turn it back over to Xoai.
Thank you for those words, Kris. I think it's so important right now that we acknowledge that while this moment has lots of fear and heartbreak, we're not trying to sort of shy away from those feelings, but instead hold them as true alongside what's also true, which is that we come from a long legacy of healers and warriors and people who made a way out of no way. And so with that, I want to turn it to Bran, who will speak more around resiliency and other ways that we can operate in this time.
Thank you, Xoai. Hi, my name is Bran Fenner. I am the Director of People and Organizational Culture at TLC. And aside from being a former organizer and consultant in the movement, I'm also an emergency room nurse and a hospice nurse. So some of the tools that I'll be sharing with you are just kind of some updated information. I wanted to share where I'm pulling these resources because as a medical professional, I always want to give the resources that I'm using so people aren't just taking my word. So I'm pulling most of my resources from the Centers for Disease Control, otherwise known as the CDC, the World Health Organization, and peer-reviewed medical journals like the Lancet, for example. So I just really want to acknowledge what everyone has already said, which is that our community is doing a really great job of taking care of each other because we have practice in it. So here are some other tips on how we can take care of ourselves and each other when it comes to COVID-19 and the spread of this disease. So some updates, there's currently no vaccine to prevent coronavirus, otherwise known as COVID-19. A lot of medical professionals are mostly relying on your immune system to fight this disease, as well as supportive care when needed. And so that's why it's important to take precautions if you have a compromised immune system, which you might see being said in the news. One of the best ways to prevent illness is to avoid being exposed to the virus, which is one of the reasons you see so many officials and governors, for example, and mayors asking people to stay home. The virus is spread mainly person to person, and that means people in close contact with each other. About 6 feet is how far droplets are spreading. And that usually happens when a person coughs or sneezes. The other thing that's important to know is that people without symptoms are able to spread COVID-19. So here's some tips on taking care of yourself and others. It's going to be really important, more so than ever, to wash your hands. And not everyone necessarily knows how to do this well. A lot of kids do because they're taught in school how to do it. They might sing happy birthday 2 times because that amount of time usually equals about 20 seconds. And you want to make sure that you are using warm water and have a lot of soap suds. If you don't have access to soap and water, then you can use hand sanitizer, and it should contain at least 60% alcohol. You want to make sure that your hands dry. And you want to cover each part of your hands. So usually when I am hand sanitizing, I go in between my fingers, my thumbs, the tops of my hands, as well as the palms. So I wanted to share who's been seen as having higher risk for having more severe symptoms of COVID-19, which includes people who are over the age of 60 and those with diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, or pulmonary disease. Terminology-wise, you might see a term called SARS-CoV-2. So it's not a separate disease, but that is known as the virus that causes COVID-19. So far, studies have not necessarily proven that people with HIV are more prone to severe symptoms. However, there are folks who have HIV who have other comorbidities like cardiovascular disease or lung disease. Also, chronic smokers are at high risk for severe disease with COVID-19. And anyone who has poorly controlled HIV should take extra precautions as well. Also, it's going to be really important to maintain an adequate supply of antiretrovirals and other concomitant medications. And if you have HIV, it's important to keep up to date with your influenza and pneumococcal vaccination. So the next thing that I'll discuss.
Hi, I'm sorry for the brief interruption. We're having some technical difficulties on the Spanish language interpretation line. I was hoping our interpreters that are doing that, if they could investigate. Apparently, we're not able to hear sound right now. If folks in the comments, si personas en los comentarios nos podrían decir si está trabajando la línea de interpretación en español, nos ayudaría mucho. Gracias.
We're just going to hold one moment while we make sure that folks who are Spanish speakers can continue to engage with us. Okay, it sounds like there might be a technical issue with a specific service provider. So I'm going to continue moving as we investigate how to fix that.
Thank you.
Should I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. Before I go into symptoms, I wanted to add another way to protect yourself and others, which is to avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth, particularly with unwashed hands. You might see me doing this throughout the call, but if I do have an itchy nose or I want to rub my eyes, I use the inside of my shirt. Even though my hands are clean, it's just a practice. So it's important to practice these things. So the next thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about symptoms. And I just named the main ones. There are a few other symptoms attached, but we'll talk about the ones that are most common to surface in the beginning. So the following symptoms tend to appear 2 to 14 days after exposure. The length of time someone is contagious is still being researched. There has been some evidence that a person has been able to pass on COVID-19 for as long as 37 days, however. So some of the symptoms that you want to keep an eye out for are fever, cough, shortness of breath, and fatigue. Some people who have been tested positive for COVID-19 have described chest pressure as sort of a heavy object or like an elephant pressing on their chest. If you think you have COVID-19, it's important to stay home and away from other people. And you want to, particularly if you're having symptoms, you want to call whoever you get your medical care from, like your nurse practitioner or your doctor. If you aren't in care, you might want to call a nearby urgent care center and find out what to do. Because each county, each state, each city has their different variances in their protocols. Some places have drive-through testing. I don't have a lot of information about that. I have heard from some people that it's fairly quick. And in general, the United States is still having a really hard time testing people. So even if you call all the right numbers, you might have a very frustrating experience in trying to get tested. We also have a shortage of a lot of things like masks. So usually where masks, who masks are for are healthcare workers, first responders, and people who are sick and are coughing. So you see a lot of people in the street with masks. Oftentimes they're not being used properly. So folks can sometimes pull their mask down to talk to someone and then pull it back up, and it's just not the best way to prevent getting COVID-19, because the ways in which some people are using masks can actually trap viruses and germs. So it's just really important to think about the ways in which staying home and not helping to spread this disease, which is being spread a lot by asymptomatic, people or people without symptoms. It's part of our ways in which we take care of each other too. Some people are reacting to this very differently than others, and all of those reasons are valid. It's still going to be important for us to push ourselves to take care of ourselves and the people that we love and care about, and the people that we don't know yet. And there is a number of people who are under the age of 60 who are being hospitalized. I don't want people to think that just because you are under that age, or maybe don't have some of the other health issues that I mentioned, that you are immune. So I think now is a really good time to stay inside as much as possible, not go to the club, and find other ways to connect with people. And that is it for me.
Thank you, Bran. all this information is so helpful, and it's especially helpful for folks who are in marginalized communities where knowledge often doesn't quite reach us. And so it's so important to keep ourselves informed and to make sure that our families and our communities are informed. I also want to note that this is a great time for us to observe and understand and think about what we value and what do people around us value, right? We can see that even though the government has faltered and shown us what it has valued and how it doesn't value the lives of specific people over others, we can use this moment to really dig into some of the values that we have and how we can practice those values every day in the ways that we show up for one another and ourselves. So we have a couple questions. I want to remind folks that if you have a question or a comment, you can just throw it into the comment section of the Facebook Live link, and someone will be monitoring those questions and sending it to us. The first question I have is for Bran. The question is, I'm seeing so much in the media about COVID-19. One thing that I have a question about is an article stating most hospitalizations in the US have been with people under 50. Is that true?
So one of the things that's been challenging about my role is that I'm having to keep up with daily research. And so the last time that I looked into this, the numbers were about 20% of hospitalizations were people under 50. But I think maybe some of the websites to use to check some of this might be the CDC website and the World Health Organization. I'm definitely going to look into that as well to see the majority of hospitalizations. And I think it's very possible. There are a lot of people under the age of 50 that have hypertension and diabetes and compromised immune systems. So I will definitely look into that.
Thank you, Bran. And folks actually have answers to some of these questions that other community members have. You can feel free to throw some articles or resources in the comments for folks' reference. We can crowdsource this knowledge, right? So the second question I have is, for folks who smoke marijuana, does that put them at risk? Is that a high-risk activity?
So definitely smoking as well as vaping is impacting the lungs and your lung capacity. So if it's something that is you find to be medicinal, then you might want to consider edibles. But for now, there hasn't been a ton of research about the differences between tobacco use and marijuana that I can share.
Thanks, Bran. The third question is around housing for trans folks. I had a question about housing for vulnerable communities within the transgender community. In relation to the equal access rule, I can imagine discrimination will increase as trans folks are forced to access shelters and housing during this time. Can someone speak to that? Well, one thing in general is that as shelters and housing gets to capacity and overcapacity, we know that folks who are often neglected and also mistreated within these shelters are trans folks, right? And other folks that come from marginalized communities like disabled folks. And so that's a prediction that we can make. I'm not sure if Kris or Bran have other information around this question, if you will share.
Kris, do you?
Yes, sorry. I don't have specific answers to this question, but I think what we can do is capture it and bring it back to our legal team and get back to folks with more specific answers on that question.
Agreed. We're seeing maybe a few local things, but one of the things that I'm most excited about from the series is finding out what resources folks need and sharing them out. And so just in doing a little bit more research on the first question around majority of hospitalizations in people under 50. So research looks to be creeping up to closer to 40%, but that is not a majority number. So hopefully I can add whatever the most up-to-date research is on that in the resources.
We have another question about resources. So the question reads, what resources can you recommend for trans folks in parts of the country with less societal support and or those who cannot access online communities? What can those of us who do have access to more support in online communities do for those who don't have that support? Bran, would you have any thoughts on this question, on the topic of resources?
Right before getting on this call, I got sent some resources and it included free internet. So I didn't get to look thoroughly through it, but it's definitely a shareable resource that address rural communities. So unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to look at it, but what seems to be happening is that last week seems to be a lot of shock and trying to figure out what to do. And it seems like we're getting more people mobilizing this week to meet people's basic needs. So I'm pretty excited actually about what's to come. And I did get a resource where I saw that reference. So I'm hoping to share it out soon.
I can also add in on this question. You know, there's at this point just hundreds of trans-led organizations all across the country. I would really recommend going to the Trans Justice Funding Project's website, and they have a map of hundreds of trans organizations, the majority of whom are led by Black and Brown trans folks, particularly trans women. And I think that would be a good resource to both just support those organizations. Groups are needing all the support and resources and donations that they can get. And I think that's a way to get folks resources and access and connected who are in parts of the country that may have less access, if there are organizations there who can support.
Thank you, Bran. Thank you, Kris. We have another question from Sebastian, who runs our disability project. What are ways that we can stay connected while we try to be in public places less? I think I can start off and other folks can add. Also, Deesha, if you would like to chime in also. So I think that folks have been getting really creative. So FaceTiming folks over meals, for example, finding ways to maybe walk or bike together, but not, but with some distance. And just finding like creative ways to connect with one another through the internet and calls. It seems like folks have really been checking in on one another, and that has been sort of some of the ways that folks have seen support come in. Deesha, Bran, Kris, would you have more to add?
Hi. Before we move on to that, we're going to switch ASL interpreters. So just give us a second before you start your answer.
Thanks, Anna.
We're ready to go.
Okay. I think Xoai, you said it really well, and I would just add a few things like, you know, there might be games that people can play virtually with each other. There's also, I just learned of Netflix Party, which is like we can watch movies together that are synced, and then if one person in the group wants to pause it, then it pauses it for everyone. So I think also, and I hope that as you know, the days and weeks go on, that more and more things like this will be coming out that help us stay connected from our individual spaces.
I could add a resource that I'll be sharing, which has a lot of the things that formerly you had to pay for are making their products free, which I would have loved if they were already free. And some of these things were already free. So the resource that I'm looking at right now includes free yoga and dance classes, and some wellness apps and some mindfulness classes and guided meditations, some workbooks and coloring books. And so those are some things that I can definitely share. I think what Deesha just mentioned, if I'm correct, there's like a Google Chrome extension that helps that work, or it's an actual separate thing where people can watch a movie together.
And the one thing that I would add is just, I think that we can't underscore enough the importance of just reaching out to our folks in community, whether it's by text or by phone, particularly folks we know who might be more isolated. For example, just to raise up, we were on a call with Miss Dee out of Atlanta earlier this week, and she was really calling on all of us to call and check in on our elders in community. So I just can't underscore enough, I think, the importance of just reaching out and connecting to folks.
I wanted to share one more thing about a basic resource, which is food. There are some chefs who have been giving away a lot of food because they have a ton of resources and no customers right now. So it's definitely good to see if there are any chefs in your local area that are possibly giving out food, and maybe sharing that resource with people as a way to show care and love to folks.
Yeah, and I would also add that, in our communities, there are so many talents and skills. I've seen folks among their friends hold art making workshops where folks grab some paper and a pen and draw together, which can be very meditative. Folks are holding actual meditation classes as well. There are also political education courses that are happening online about like deportation, the history of deportation, migrant justice, and all kinds of political topics. And so I think in terms of digital resources, there's lots of ways that we can use our skills to connect with one another. Are there any other questions? It's looking like there may not be any more. If you have any last questions or comments, please throw them in the comment section. We have a couple of folks also who are sharing resources in the comments, like how to practice yoga at home. So make sure to scroll through and see what other folks are sharing so we can help each other out. And if you also have feedback on how we conducted this call and suggestions for the future, we're really open to that. We want to make sure that this is not just as accessible as possible, but also really useful, and that it provides a space for you to show up however you're feeling that day with all of the emotion that you have, so that we can be together more often. So I want to remind folks that this is just the first of many calls. If you have any suggestions for our future ones, send us those, but we'll have more in the future on Fridays. You can sign up for our email list to stay updated at transgenderlawcenter.org. I'm gonna address one more question before we close out, because it seems like some folks are typing them right now. And also some folks are noting that they're loving the language justice. So shout out to our Spanish interpreters. So this first question is, for folks working on decarceration response, what kind of supports are being organized for when/if people are out? Bran or Kris, do you have a pulse on that?
This is Kris. I think that we can definitely follow up with more kind of resources and info. And I think we were also thinking that one of the, since we're doing this every week, that one of the topics would be around folks who are incarcerated and the impact that this is having. I would say, like, I would really look to some of the groups who've been leading that work, like the Transgender Intersex Justice Project, based here in Oakland, in San Francisco, California, and other groups who are also doing work around folks getting out of detention, like Familiar Trans Queer Liberation Movement and the Black LGBT Migrant Project. I would really look to some of those groups to see what type of supports are being offered. But I think we can definitely follow up with some more concrete resources and information.
I would just add, if it's okay, in New York City, there's a transgender emergency bail release fund. I don't know exactly what it's called, but they've been working on since before COVID, getting trans folks released from jails in New York City. And so they might be a good resource as well.
Thank you all. We're going to try our best to answer questions following the call. This is recorded and will be sent to folks who RSVP'd and also will live on our Facebook page. So we'll continue answering questions by typing them if you have further questions after this call ends. But I just want to thank everyone for showing up today, for showing up for yourself and each other, and joining us and experimenting with us as we work on ways to connect with each other in this difficult time. We're really looking forward to continuing to connect with you all. So please keep an eye out for future calls. I want to thank Kris and Bran and Deesha for being among the panelists. I want to thank the Spanish and ASL interpreters for making sure that this call can be accessible to folks who often can't access these kind of resources. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Please take care of yourselves, family. Talk to you all soon. Much, much love.